Steelspire's grand market no longer resembled a place of trade. The stalls that once glittered with wares were shattered into splinters, their goods scattered across cracked stone. Smoke hung low, stinking of oil and ember ash. Sparks hissed through the air as braziers overturned, their molten coals rolling across the cobbles like spilled stars. Kale stood in the heart of the ruin. His cloak was torn, streaked with soot and blood. The soul blade pulsed in his hands, ember veins alive with molten light, shadows clinging to its edge like smoke that refused to dissipate. He breathed hard, his chest burning with exertion, but his stance was steady. The whispers that filled his skull were no longer chaotic or deafening. They were calm, hungry, focused. Do not yield. Eclipse their order. Accord knights tightened their formation around him, shields raised, spears leveled. The silver and blue of their banners fluttered above the square as if the city itself drew breath in rhythm with their discipline. At their head, Captain Helion stood with his glaive resting across his shoulder. His armor gleamed white-blue despite the haze, his eyes burning with the certainty of a man who had sworn oaths to light and law. Kale angled the soul blade so the veins along its length caught the glow of a toppled forge brazier. The ground beneath him hummed faintly. He felt the seam of a fissure running like a hidden vein under the cobbles. The soul blade whispered as though it too tasted the seam, eager for him to cut it open. Helion's voice cut across the square, strong and commanding. Shadow Forger. Kneel and the city will be spared. Kale looked at the broken stalls, at the scorched walls, at the constructs frozen in mid-motion as though their very code had been shaken apart. His voice came back low, steady, carrying through the smoke. You mean your city? And no. Helion slid his visor into place. His knuckles tightened on the glaive. Take him. The shield wall advanced in perfect rhythm, boots striking the cobbles like a drum beat. Kale stepped back with one foot until his heel touched the seam beneath him. He dropped an umbral anchor into the shadow and felt it sink deep like a nail hammered into the fabric of reality. The first rank lunged, spears darting toward his chest. Kale let himself dissolve into the seam's shadow and snapped across space to the anchor. He reappeared behind their formation. His soul blade swept in a black crescent. Shadow flare exploded outward, arcs of ember black fire carving through shields and armor. Radiant wards shattered like brittle glass. Knights screamed and dissolved into shards of data. Helion turned instantly, his glaive sweeping down in a radiant arc. Kale caught it two-handed. The clash roared through the square, black flame colliding with white brilliance. Sparks sprayed across the cobbles, the ground beneath their feet splitting from the force. You should be ash, Helion snarled, pressing hard. The purge should have ended you. Kale's eyes glowed ember black. His teeth clenched. Then maybe it is broken. He twisted, drove the pommel of the soul blade into Helion's chest, and shoved him back. The captain staggered 2 steps, his line rippling. Kale let the anchor pull him again, snapping back across the square just as a spear slashed through where he had stood. He landed lightly, cloak flaring. His laugh came sharp and raw. The whispers purred in his skull. Edges cut twice. Kale moved along the edges of the formation, striking where discipline faltered, carving into the seams of their unity. Each strike widened cracks, each shadow flare devoured more radiant light. The knights pressed harder but they bled momentum. Helion roared commands, rallying them with furious discipline, but even Accord's order strained against the weight of Kale's storm. Then another sound cut through the din. A horn blast, low and booming, rolled across the square. The far gate shuddered and blew inward in a shower of sparks. Raiders poured through in a wave of crimson and black. Their armor was lacquered in dark sheen, their banners unfurled with the emblem of dominion. At their front strode Aaron, massive and brutal, his grin splitting his scarred face. His axe was a slab of steel broader than Kale's chest, resting on one shoulder as though it weighed nothing. Back, Accord, Aaron bellowed. The bounty is ours. Helion did not take his eyes off Kale. His voice rang cold through his visor. You never owned honor, Aaron. Do not pretend to now. Aaron laughed, the sound raw and eager. Honor buys nothing. Heads do. Dominion slammed into a chord's line. The silver wall met crimson ferocity. Spears clashed with axes. Shields splintered under brute strength. The grand market, built for the selling of steel, became the forge where steel was tested. Kale stood at the eye of the storm. Both guilds wanted him. Both guilds saw him as a prize. He lifted the soul blade, ember veins running molten under the smoke. His voice cut like flint against steel. Funny thing. I don't belong to either of you. He dragged the blade across the cracked cobbles. The soul blade found hairline fractures beneath the trampling boots. The fissure groaned and widened. Shadows erupted upward, splitting the battlefield. Accord's shield line stumbled. Dominion's vanguard spilled into the gap. Kale slid through the chaos, carving with surgical malice. He cut into the soft seams where armor bent, where shields lifted, where men thought themselves safe. Each strike devoured, each cut fed the whispers. If this story has you listening this far, subscribe to Azure Inkblade so the next chapter finds you instead of getting buried. It helps us keep making more of these every week. Now, back to the chapter. The soul blade purred. Feed. Deeper. Aaron barreled through his own men to reach him, laughter spilling like sparks from a forge. Helion shoved aside his knights to close from the other flank. They came at Kale like jaws snapping shut. Helion's glaive arced in radiant fire. Aaron's axe swung down like a falling gate. Kale pressed his palm to the blade and triggered Eclipse Break. Black light detonated outward, rewriting the rules of force itself. Helion's glaive lost its brilliance, its swing dulling mid-arc. Aaron's axe slammed wrong, its weight turned against the haft. Both leaders staggered. Helion's voice broke with disbelief. What are you? Kale's eyes burned hotter. Unwelcome. His soul blade slashed a shadow flare between them. The blast split guild against guild, tearing through banners and bucklers alike. The market's edges erupted. Mercenaries who had lingered in alleys surged in, their colors a riot of crests and cracked sigils. Nets flew. Bolas spun. Chains clanged against the cobbles. They came not to kill but to subdue, to claim the bounty alive if they could. Kale slashed a net apart and stepped through the gap. Bola snapped against his blade. A chain coiled around his forearm. Kale yanked the handler forward and split him open with one brutal cut. His HUD flashed with warning red. His breath came ragged, his body thin with fatigue. But the whispers sang. More. More. Guard constructs stepped forward at last, halberds raised in flawless geometry. Their movements were perfect until they were not. One froze mid-stride. Another flickered. A third turned its head at an impossible angle. Code jittered across their forms and vanished. Steelspire itself had begun to glitch around him. Helion barked orders. Containment field. Seal the square. Radiant glyphs bloomed from staves at the rear. Light locked into a circle around Kale, chains of brilliance sinking into the cobbles. Kale lifted the soul blade, smiled without humor, and shoved the blade into a fissure seam. Shadows flared. The glyphs shivered and collapsed as if grease had been poured on glass. More mercenaries dove from awnings, knives aimed for his kidneys. Kale dragged the soul blade along his own shadow and stepped into theirs. He stood when they hit the ground, already bleeding. One still breathed, staring at him in shock. Tell your guilds, Kale said, his voice ragged. I don't do cages. The survivor fled in terror. Others broke, scattering into alleys. Only the desperate remained, the kind who craved wealth more than life. Kale obliged their greed with death. The world hiccuped. Static edged his vision. HUDs across the square blazed with system text instability surge detected local zone integrity at risk warning, apex anomaly escalating beyond safe threshold. A heatless wind hissed across the cobbles. Shadows lengthened unnaturally and stayed, fixed in place. Radiant shields dulled. Dominion's crimson sheen lost its luster. Even the smoke from braziers froze mid-rise, pillars of grey glass. Kale swayed. The soul blade swelled in his hands, both too heavy and too light. His voice slipped from his lips in a whisper that was not his own. Not yet. The system answered in a voice that was colder than steel. Legacy Unbound event-triggered screams erupted from throats that thought themselves too brave to scream. Players tried to run but their feet dragged as if the shadows were tar. NPC vendors blinked in and out, bodies clipping through tables and walls. The fires in the forges inverted, burning with black flame that pooled light on the floor like oil. Helion planted his glaive into the cobbles to steady himself. Aaron laughed like a man watching the end of the world. Kale lifted his blade. The whispers were no longer whispers but a choir that filled every corner of the square. Be seen. Be storm. Helion shouted. Circle tight. Weather it? Aaron roared in answer. No, I will cut him myself. Kale let him charge. They met in the center of the ruined market, storm against storm, steel against steel. Aaron's axe crashed down like a siege ram. Kale caught it and stepped aside, turning the force, cutting deep into the warlord's knuckles. Aaron laughed and bled and punched Kale in the jaw with his offhand. Kale staggered, tasted copper. Helion's glaive swept in from the other side. Kale rolled under it, slashed upward, and burned off the knives that raked his cloak. His health dipped, his corruption climbed zone integrity, 78%. He realized with sudden clarity that if he kept fighting here the city itself might not survive. The market stones burned under his boots. The air tasted like iron filings. Accord's chants collided with Dominion's battle cries. In their seam Kale moved like an idea the world regretted. He felt the shape of it. One deep cut through the web of fissures could tear the whole city down. The soul blade pulsed eagerly. Open the border. Let it fall. Kale's knuckles whitened on the hilt. He looked at Helion, stubborn and furious, at Aaron, delighted and murderous, at the mercenaries white-knuckled on their nets, at the constructs frozen in glitching poses. Not yet, he said to the blade. He slashed a black crescent wide, throwing both guild leaders back, and sprinted toward the delivery alleys at the market's edge. Shadows rose to swallow him. Behind him the system's voice continued, cold and inevitable instability, escalating event, continuing. Steelspire shuddered as Kale vanished into the alley, the soul blade pulsing like a coal in his fist.